It is understandable why the locals are feeling a certain way.
Immigration demonstration attended by hundreds in The Hague turned violent on Saturday.
But the solution is not anger and frustration towards immigrants.
The government has mismanaged the immigration file. They've been so irresponsible.
Instead of asking questions to policymakers, we're asking people who just landed yesterday. Even an immigrant is facing a shortage of jobs.
Hello and a very warm welcome to the first episode in our podcast series, Indians on the Move. From Australia to the United Kingdom and the US to Canada, the past month has been fairly disconcerting for the immigrant community globally. What with the rising anti-immigrant sentiment? While most immigrants, and specifically economic migrants, tend to keep their heads down and focus on their work, the recent policy shifts and the inflammatory rhetoric is forcing them to defend themselves against accusations of stealing jobs and draining resources, despite the fact that they bring a huge value to their adopted or host country. So let's try and dispel some of the myths surrounding immigrants today. And I have with me a special guest, Sanu Nair, who's the CEO of Remittor, which is a fintech platform that helps specifically NRIs, that is non-resident Indians, to transfer wealth. Many thanks, Sanu, for speaking with us on this very critical subject today.
Thank you, Maha. Thank you for having me over.
I want to understand your perspective, how you read the situation globally on what is fueling this anti-immigrant sentiment.
I think that this is not something that has suddenly happened over the last month or two. This has been in the works for the last couple of years, especially post-pandemic. There are multiple layers of it. Most apparent one is that there is a lot of misguided angst towards immigrants. So what happened post-pandemic is there was a sudden shortage of workforce. These economies, be it UK, Australia, Canada, or US, needed a jumpstart. They needed immigrants who could not just take on these jobs that nobody else wanted, apparently, but also work at a wage that no one locally was willing to take. And then these, immigrants came in, they took whatever job that came by. The problem here is that the economic reasons or the social reasons which are impacting the local population are the very same set of problems which an immigrant is also facing. Even an immigrant is facing a shortage of jobs. Even an immigrant is made to wait in the hospital for treatment. They're struggling with rising rental or expensive housing. So it's not as if only the locals are getting impacted. It is also the immigrant population. However, there's also this consensus across all these countries that there is also political parties are taking advantage or speaking to these angst, and therefore it is now becoming more of a social pressure on these respective governments to take action against immigrants. In my opinion, they're not really going after the root cause, but they're going after the most immediate scapegoat for the lack of proper planned policies.
I'll take your point there, and very important one that you made, the political angle. I mean, we've seen fears being whipped up for political reasons. But specifically here in Canada, Sanu, what I find surprising is that this country was always believed to be welcoming immigrants for decades. And suddenly there was a turn here as well. Over the last couple of years, we've seen the sentiment in Canada change as well. And even the Canadians themselves find it surprising, some of them, because they feel that this is something which is not really a sentiment that ever existed in Canada. Are there any specific domestic reasons that you believe are fueling this here?
Completely agree with that observation. Like, Canada was always known for being such an immigrant-friendly country, and I still believe it is, because when we moved here in 2018, we were in love not just with the country, but specifically with the people. I think the coldest country with the warmest people. However, what has happened is that, again, there's been both domestic reasons and impact of global affairs fueling what we are seeing right now, what we're witnessing right now. At the domestic level, I would say lack of infrastructural growth to support this increase in population.
Are you talking about the housing crisis?
Yes.
Yeah.
Housing, say for example, pre-pandemic, and an average yearly increase in rental in a city like Vancouver or Toronto used to be around 1 to 2%. It went up to 8 to 10% in these cities year on year, which was a sudden spike, and it impacted everyone. Or let's say a packet of bread. Before the pandemic, it used to cost us maybe $2.50 to $3, and now it is at anywhere between $3.5 to $4. This may not seem a lot, but for families that are already impacted by each and everything that they touch, or the great Canadian life that they wanted, is getting impacted every time they go to the grocery store at the end of every month when they have to pay the rent or the mortgage. In other countries, this angst is being directed towards another set of victims, which are the immigrants. Instead of asking questions to policymakers, we're asking people who just landed yesterday. So that is what's happening in Canada, in my observation.
I would tend to, in some sense, agree with some of the reasons that you're giving here. And also then take this conversation to whether or not the general public, the citizens recognize the contributions that immigrants make overall. For instance, we all know that in the US, the Silicon Valley was powered by Indian IT professionals.
Right.
In Canada, there is a huge requirement of healthcare professionals.
Right.
It's not like people are not aware of that. People know that. When, as you mentioned in your first answer, that people are waiting in emergency rooms. Yes, they are waiting sometimes for 8 hours to see a doctor or a healthcare practitioner. So they are aware of these shortages. And when the provinces open up pathways for these specialized professionals to come to the country, why is it that there is no recognition that these are services we need, we require? And still there is angst against immigrants.
Completely agree with that observation. What happens though is that, regardless of whether you're an immigrant or a local, when you go to an hospital, you go beyond the most obvious aspect, which is the fact that they're an immigrant, but the fact that the person helping you is taking care of your health and your family and everything. So you tend to be more accepting of that situation. However, one needs to understand that a society doesn't always work just because of highly skilled immigrants. Yes, we need more engineers and doctors and physicians, but the same society also needs people to do jobs like, to serve coffee or to work on the agricultural land, on farmlands, or plumbers. Now we need a society, a healthy society needs people, needs workforce at all these levels. The jobs that can't be filled domestically, you will need to get people from outside, regardless of what strata of the society does that fit into. I think even us as immigrants should not make it sound as if we need more highly skilled immigrants and that's the only ones that we need, because we would say so because largely a lot of us would identify ourselves in that space. But we also need people to take care of other aspects of our lives as well. Rationalizing and understanding the need of the society is important. What has happened specifically in Canada is because the idea was to get as many immigrants as possible and then finally figuring out where exactly would they fit in. And infrastructure, of course, did not catch up with the sudden spurt of, population growth that happened.